I wasn't supposed to be alive to tell you this. For decades, they believed I was dead, buried, forgotten. My name was whispered in prayers, printed on a funeral card, and crossed out in the convent's archives. But here I am, still breathing, still remembering, and finally, ready to speak. I know what I'm about to share will shock you, maybe even scare you. But it's time. Time to uncover the truth they tried so hard to erase. I was a nun. I lived in a convent that preached silence, obedience, and sacrifice. But what they never preached was freedom, or truth, or justice. I entered that place full of hope, believing I'd be closer to God. What I found was something else entirely, a world of control, of fear disguised as holiness. And as the days turned into years, I realized something chilling. I was never going to leave that place alive, unless I made them believe I didn't exist anymore. So I did the unthinkable, planned my death. And I escaped. But don't get me wrong, this isn't a story of rebellion. It's a story of survival, of what happens when a woman is pushed so far into silence that the only way out is to vanish completely. If you're still watching, I ask you to stay with me. Because this isn't just my story. It's the story of every woman who was ever told to kneel, obey, and disappear. Asterisk, I was just 18 when I first stepped through the iron gates of St. Aurelia's convent. My hands trembled. Not out of fear, but reverence. My heart was pounding with excitement, like I was about to enter heaven's waiting room. I had no doubts, no fears, only a pure, burning desire to serve God. I came from a small town in the South. My parents were strict, devout Catholics. We didn't have much, but we had faith. And faith, I was taught, could carry you through anything. When I told my mother I wanted to become a nun, she cried tears of joy. My father placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "You've chosen the holiest path I thought I had." I really believed that. Back then, I didn't see the worn faces of the sisters. I didn't notice how their eyes never lingered too long. I thought their silence was sacred. Now I know it was survival. But on that day, I stood proud. Clutching my Bible, dressed in a plain white dress, I made my first vows with a heart wide open. I wasn't running from the world, I was running toward God. They welcomed me with soft smiles and warm hands. The Mother Superior praised my devotion. "God has brought you here for a reason," she whispered. I believed her. I believed every word. I thought I was beginning a journey of light, purpose, and divine peace. I had no idea that I was walking into a cage, a silent prison hidden behind stained glass and holy hymns. But it would take years before I saw it for what it really was. Back then, all I saw was God's will. And I was ready to give him everything. Asterisk, the first night was when it truly hit me. The sound of the gates locking behind me echoed in my chest like a verdict. I was no longer in the world, I was in his house, or so they said. But it didn't feel holy. It felt silent. Unnaturally silent. I thought there would be singing, prayer, sisterhood, but instead I was met with cold glances and tighter rules than I had ever known. From the moment I woke up at 4 a.m. to the moment I laid down in the darkness, every second of my day was controlled, every word measured, every breath. Obedient. The walls weren't just stone, they were discipline. You couldn't speak unless spoken to. You couldn't ask questions. Laughter was considered vanity. Tears were weakness and privacy. It didn't exist. Even the confessional felt like a trap. I started to understand that this wasn't about faith, it was about control. They didn't want devotion, they wanted submission. Blind, quiet, absolute. There were punishments too, but never spoken aloud. If a sister disobeyed, she disappeared. For a day or two. When she returned, her eyes were darker, quieter. No one asked where she'd been. We just accepted it. We learned not to look too long, not to care too loudly, I tried to tell myself this was discipline, that I was being purified. But something deep inside me whispered, this isn't God's will. This is fear in disguise. Even meals were rituals of silence. No words, just stares. I began to feel like a ghost in my own body. Like I had died the day I put on the habit and was now just a shadow walking in robes. I was supposed to feel closer to heaven. But I'd never felt farther from anything human. Asterisk at the center of the convent was Mother Agnella. To the outside world, she was the very image of sainthood, serene, composed, wrapped in grace. But to us, those who lived under her eyes day and night, she was something else entirely. Her presence alone could silence a room. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her gaze was enough to send a chill through your spine. She would glide across the stone corridors like a shadow, and wherever she went, silence followed. But it wasn't reverence. It was fear. She had rules that weren't in any Bible. No eye contact longer than 3 seconds. Never turn. Your back when she enters the chapel. Do not speak of dreams or desires. They are selfish. At first I thought these were traditions, sacred practices I had yet to understand. But with time, I saw them for what they were, chains. Mother Agnella had a way of speaking to you that made you feel like sin itself. She could turn a missed prayer into a moral failing, a question into rebellion. And if she thought your soul was straying, she would summon you privately behind the doors of her chamber. None of us ever spoke of what happened there, but we all knew. The silence that returned with those sisters was heavier than any confession. She used scripture like a weapon, twisted God's words into instruments of control. Blessed are the meek, she'd say, right before isolating a sister for speaking out of turn. The Lord chastens those he loves, she whispered when one of us came back from punishment. I began to fear not just her, but myself, my thoughts, my instincts. Even my prayers felt monitored, as if God himself had turned into her accomplice. And still, I tried to obey, to submit. I thought that maybe my discomfort was proof of my imperfection, that holiness was supposed to hurt. But the truth was simpler, okay, and darker. I wasn't in a house of God. I was in a kingdom of control. And the queen wore a habit just like mine. Asterisk, it started small, almost invisible. A comment here, a correction there. Your thoughts are too. Loud Mother Agnella once told me. I didn't know what that meant, but it stuck with me like a stain. Then came the extra prayers I had to say at night, alone in the freezing chapel. The others would go to sleep, but I'd be left kneeling in the dark, whispering litanies until my knees ached and my voice gave out. I thought it was penance. I thought I'd failed spiritually somehow, but I hadn't. I had simply shown too much emotion, too much individuality. When I smiled too much, I was called vain. When I asked questions about the rules, I was accused of pride. One morning, I forgot to bow before the altar and was forced to clean the lavatories in silence for 7 days, without speaking, without eye contact, without explanation. I wasn't even allowed to eat with the others. They called it reflection time, but it felt more like erasure. Like I was being erased from myself. Mother Agnella told me, the devil hides in women who think too much. That sentence changed me. It made me afraid of my own thoughts. Every time I felt doubt, fear, or even longing, I'd beg for forgiveness. I began to believe I was broken and clean in spirit. She'd place her hand on my head and whisper, God sees your filth, but he gives you a chance to suffer and be cleansed. And I wanted to be clean. I wanted to be holy. Soon I stopped looking at my reflection. I stopped writing, stopped laughing. It was as if I was carving out pieces of myself, one by one, to fit the mold they wanted. The mold that made me invisible, silent, obedient. But no matter how much I gave up, it was never enough. The more I surrendered, the more they demanded. It was no longer devotion, it was submission through fear disguised as love. That was when I began to wonder what kind of God needs me to disappear to prove I'm worthy. They called it the room. wasn't marked by any sign and no one spoke of it aloud, but every sister knew where it was. Down a narrow corridor past the archives, through a door that creaked like it hadn't been opened in centuries. I first heard about it when Sister Magdalena disappeared. One day she was with us during morning mass, and the next she was gone. No explanation, no mention, just silence. On the fourth day, she returned, her face pale, her steps slow, her eyes hollow. She didn't speak for weeks. And when I finally found the courage to ask her what happened, she only whispered, "Don't question. It's worse when you do." That's when I realized obedience wasn't just expected, was enforced. Sisters who disobeyed, who cried too loudly, who dared to speak of homesickness, doubt, or God forbid escape, were taken. Sometimes for a day, sometimes for weeks. They came back, changed, quiet, mechanical, as if part of them had been taken and buried. I began to dread the sound of keys at night, the shuffle of heavy shoes down the hallway. They stopped in front of your cell, you prayed it wasn't your turn. And if they didn't, you prayed for whoever it was. Mother Agnella said it was spiritual cleansing, that God required silence, solitude, and discipline. But I knew better. It was a warning, a reminder that we belonged to them, not to heaven. The worst part wasn't the isolation itself, was the way we all started to accept it. We normalized the disappearances. We looked the other way. We said nothing because we were terrified, because we knew that the moment we spoke, we could be next. They didn't need chains to keep us captive. Fear was enough. Guilt was enough. And I began to understand. We weren't just sisters in Christ. We were prisoners of ritual. Some of us were being punished not for what we did, but for who we still were inside. I remember the exact moment it broke inside me. It wasn't dramatic, no screaming, no outburst, just silence. I was kneeling during Vespers, repeating prayers I no longer believed, mouthing words I couldn't feel. My knees were bruised, my throat dry, and yet it wasn't the physical pain. That undid me. It was the emptiness, a vast echoing hollowness where my faith used to live. And in that silence, a single thought formed, quiet but thunderous. I don't belong here. It was the first honest thought I'd had in years. It hit me like a confession I didn't know I was allowed to make. I looked around at the sisters, beside me some younger than me. Others old and worn, saw not peace, but submission. Their eyes were dead. Their hands clutched rosaries like lifelines. But their faces said they'd already drowned. And I realized I was becoming one of them. That night I couldn't sleep. My thoughts raced, spinning between guilt and clarity. Had I failed God, or had this place failed me? I thought about my mother, my home, the version of myself that used to laugh freely, that dreamed of making a difference. I had buried her somewhere beneath the weight of rules, obedience, and fear. I was becoming a shadow. And I knew if I didn't do something, if I stayed ... that version of me would die forever. But what could I do? We were never allowed outside unsupervised. Letters were censored, phone calls forbidden. We had no money, no contacts, no voice. And yet, even with all those impossibilities, a tiny ember ignited inside me. A dangerous, forbidden thought. What if I could escape? I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew this. If I didn't leave one day, they'd bury me. And the world would never know I had once existed at all. I knew it was dangerous. I knew what could happen if they found out. But desperation dulls fear. And on that cold Tuesday morning, after another sleepless night spent clutching my rosary like a lifeline, I did it. I wrote a letter. It's just a few words on a torn scrap of /cron. Paper I had hidden beneath my mattress. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't even complete. It's just the truth. My name is Sister Anna. I am not safe. Please help me. I had no address, no phone number, just a name, my cousin, the only person I thought might still remember me. I folded the paper, wrapped it in cloth. and slipped it into the back pocket of a man's coat, one of the workers who came once a month to deliver supplies. He didn't look at me. None of them ever did. But I prayed that this time, just this once, someone would care enough to read what was hidden there. For 2 days, I waited. Every creak in the hallway made my stomach turn. Every glance from Mother, Agnella, made me flinch. I rehearsed excuses in my mind, lies I could tell if they questioned me. But then, on the third night, I was summoned. No explanation, just, Mother Agnella wants to see you. Her chamber was dim, lit only by 2 tall candles. She sat in silence for what felt like hours before speaking. Then she opened her desk drawer and pulled out the letter. My letter unopened, still folded. My heart stopped. She didn't scream. She didn't scold. She just looked at me and said, "You're confused, and confusion is a sin." Then she tore the letter in half, slowly, never breaking eye contact. "There is no outside anymore. There is only here, and you belong. To God now?" I wasn't punished, not physically. But from that day on, things changed. I was never alone. My duties were increased. My letters were checked. My personal belongings searched. I had stepped out of line, and now I was being watched, trapped, like a bird that dared to fly and had its wings clipped. But I didn't regret it, because even though the letter never made it, the thought had. And thoughts once born don't die easily. Asterisk, it was raining that night. Not just a drizzle, but one of those heavy, relentless storms that made the chapel roof creak and the garden paths turn to mud. We were all in our cells. Candles dimmed, silence in full force. But around midnight, I woke to footsteps. Heavy, urgent. Not the slow, meditative pacing of a nun doing rounds. This was something else. Something wrong. I crept to my door, pressing my ear against the cold. Wood? Voices low, firm. Then the unmistakable sound of weeping. I recognized it immediately. Sister Lucia. She was just 19. Sweet, quiet, and too kind for a place like this. She'd only been here a few months. I'd seen the signs, her hesitation. During prayers, the way she looked longingly at the chapel windows. Like she was trying to remember what the sky looked like beyond the stone walls. The voices grew louder. Then came a thud, the sound of something or someone falling. I opened my door a crack just wide enough to see the corridor. What I saw is burned into my memory forever. 2 sisters older, silent, with blank expressions, were dragging Sister Lucia by her arms. She wasn't fighting, just sobbing. Her face was pale, soaked with tears and rainwater. She locked eyes with me for just a moment. And in that moment, I saw something I'd never seen before in this place. Pure terror. No one spoke a word, no explanation. No punishment list posted the next day. Sister Lucia was simply gone. Her cell was emptied by morning, her belongings removed. Her name never mentioned again. I asked around carefully, quietly, but every sister responded the same way. Lowered eyes, tight lips, silence. It was as if she had never existed. F. She had been erased from the world, and I realized that could be me. That would be me. I wasn't careful. If I kept pushing. If I failed again, that was the night the fear became real. And it was also the night I knew I had to do more than escape. I had to disappear. Because at St. Aurelia's, leaving wasn't an option. You either submitted or vanished. Asterisk, after what happened to Sister Lucia, something changed in me. The fear didn't paralyze me anymore. It focused me. I started watching, listening, not to obey, but to learn. Every locked door, every routine. Every gap in the silence, I cataloged it all in my mind, like a prisoner mapping the walls of her cell. But the more I observed, the clearer it became. This place wasn't designed for faith. It was built to keep us in. We weren't allowed outside alone. Ever. When we worked in the garden, we were escorted. When deliveries arrived, we were locked inside. The gates were iron, the locks massive, and Mother Agnella held the only keys. The windows had bars. The cellar had bolts. Even the chapel, the so-called sanctuary, had a door that could be locked. From the outside, they said it was for protection. But protection from what? I thought of running through the backfields. But they stretched endlessly, and I had no clothes, no ID, no money. Just a habit and worn shoes. I thought of hiding in the supply van, but it was inspected both leaving and entering. I considered faking illness to be sent to the hospital, but we had no doctors. Only one nurse, and she was as devoted to Mother Agnella as a soldier to a general. Every idea ended in the same place, a dead end. But still, I couldn't stop, because now I knew what they were capable of. They erased Lucia, and they would erase me, too, unless I erased myself first. What if I didn't run? What if I disappeared? What if they believed I was dead? The thought terrified me, was madness, dangerous, and yet the only plan that didn't rely on force or speed. Was the one that used their own system against them? I wasn't ready to act, not yet, but the seed was planted. The idea had taken root, and in that dark, quiet prison, it was the first time in years I felt something close to hope, a terrifying, fragile hope. It was an accident. Or maybe it was divine intervention. I still don't know. I had been assigned to clean the lower chapel, a space we rarely used except on certain feast days. At the back of the room was a heavy wooden hatch I had seen many times but never questioned. That day something told me to open it. Curiosity, desperation. Maybe both. The hinges groaned as I lifted the door, revealing a narrow staircase descending into cold darkness. I hesitated, then stepped down, heart racing. What I found beneath was not a crypt in the traditional sense. No tombs, no crosses, just a small, stone room lit by a single flickering bulb. In the center stood an old metal filing cabinet covered in dust. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Inside were dozens of folders each, labeled with a name, a date, and a single word: deceased. Names I recognized, sisters who had died years ago, and others whose names I had never heard. I flipped through the documents. Some had. Cause of death listed complications, natural causes, mental decline, but there were no medical records, no burial certificates, just pages stamped and signed by Mother Agnella herself. Then I found it's Sister Miriam's file, the one I saw dragged away in the night, her date of death. The very next day, no body, no funeral, just a declaration: deceased, no visitation. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about obedience. Anymore, it wasn't even about control. This was about erasure. Women were disappearing, and the church had leased this part of it was making them ghosts. I realized I wasn't the only one who tried to resist. Others had spoken, had broken rules, had cried out for help. And instead of being helped, they were declared dead. I placed the folder back, hands trembling. I closed the drawer, sealed the hatch. And I swore to myself right there in that crypt, I will not die in this place. Not like them. Asterisk, the thought was like a spark in the dark. It came suddenly, and I hated myself for even considering it. But once it entered my mind, I couldn't unthink it. I had just seen what they do to those who resist erase them. Make them disappear, declare them dead. And that's when it hit me. If they believe I'm dead, they'll stop looking for me. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid awake, heart pounding, staring into the shadows and turning the idea over in my mind again and again. It sounded insane, dangerous, blasphemous even. But so was everything that had already been done to us. Faking my death would mean outsmarting a system designed to trap souls. Every movement inside the convent was monitored, every routine timed. I knew that even the smallest mistake could expose me. But I also knew that the crypt records weren't questioned. No one from the outside ever verified them. No family ever came. We were orphans of the world owned by silence. I began to observe the routines of the infirmary, the locked cabinets, the expired medications no one bothered to dispose of. I watched the patterns of the night sisters when they prayed, when they slept, when they changed shifts. I memorized the keys they used, the times they left doors unguarded. Piece by piece, I built the impossible, a plan to vanish inside. The most controlled place on earth, I knew I'd need help. But trust was deadly in a place like this. A single word in the wrong ear and I'd end up with my name in that crypt file. So I stayed quiet, calculated. I hid supplies where I could, smuggled old linens to build what I'd later use as padding. Every day I rehearsed my role sick, fading, growing weaker. It had to be believable, had to be real. The risk was immense. They found out before it was done, they wouldn't just punish me, they'd erase me for real. But if I succeeded, I could walk away from the tomb they tried to bury me in. I wasn't just planning an escape anymore. I was planning a resurrection. Asterisk, I had no room for mistakes. If even one part of this plan failed, it wouldn't just be overwrit, would be my death. Sentence. So I moved slowly, patiently. Every action had to appear ordinary. Every glance, every breath, rehearsed. I started with the medicine. The infirmary kept old pills and a locked cabinet antihistamines, sedatives, expired antibiotics. I didn't need poison. I needed something that would simulate the symptoms of illness, lethargy, vomiting, loss of consciousness. Weeks, but I managed to collect just enough. It's one pill at a time, hidden inside the seam of my mattress. Next came the letter. Every death in the convent had to be recorded either in writing to the church's central diocese or filed internally. I knew the format because I had transcribed many myself. I memorized the language, the formalities, the stamp. Using scrap paper stolen from the archives, I forged my own death notice. Sister Anna deceased due to complications from acute infection. No external contact requested. I practiced the handwriting over and over until it mirrored Mother, Agnella's, perfectly. I even smudged the ink slightly, just enough to make it look like it had been handled by trembling hands. But the most dangerous part was the key. The doors to the storage wing, the one that led to the back courtyard, were always locked. And only 3 people had access. Mother Agnella, the maintenance brother, and Sister Elvira, who oversaw laundry. I had no chance with the first 2, but Elvira. She was older, kind, fading in memory. Sometimes she forgot where she put things. And once during her evening prayer, she left the key resting on the laundry shelf. That was my only window. I copied it in soap. Days later, I melted wax and cast a mold in secret. The crude metal I found in the tool room was rough, but it fit. It worked. I had a key dot. I now had all the pieces. The pills to simulate my illness. The letter to cover my disappearance. The key to unlock my escape. But I had no second chance. No backup. If anything went wrong, I wouldn't get to explain. I would be buried, maybe literally so. I waited. I prayed. And I whispered to myself each night, you only get one life. Hey, and this one is not theirs to take. Asterisk, it was a Thursday. Cold, windless. The kind of night where even the stars seemed to hold their breath. I had waited months for that moment. Every detail planned, every risk calculated. But when the hour finally came, all my planning collapsed into raw fear. My hands trembled as I swallowed the first pill, then another. I had no idea if it would work. I only knew it had to. As I lay in my cot pretending to shiver, I recited Psalm 91 over and over in my head. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. But even the scripture felt distant now. God had been so silent for so long, I didn't know if he was still watching, or if he had turned his face away. Minutes passed, then hours. The nausea started. My heartbeat slowed. My lips dried. And Then came the moaning, the part I had rehearsed silently in the dark over and over, just loud enough to wake someone, but not enough to draw everyone. Sister Bernadette was the first to find me. She touched my forehead, panicked. I felt her call others. Voices blurred. Footsteps echoed. Someone tried to force water between my lips. She's not responding. Someone whispered. It's serious. Then the mother arrived. Mother Agnella looked at me for a long time. I kept my eyes closed, my body limp, my breathing shallow. I heard her say, "Bring her to the infirmary. Don't alert the diocese yet." My body was carried light as death and placed on the stiff cot of the infirmary. They left me alone, believing I was unconscious. That's when I knew it was now or never. At 2:47 a.m., I opened my eyes, dizzy, weak, but alive. I crawled from the bed, heart pounding louder than any bell in the chapel. The hallway was silent. My homemade key was hidden inside my habit's inner lining. I reached the door, hands shaking. I prayed not for protection, but for strength. To keep moving. The key turned. It clicked. The door opened, and I ran. Not with speed, but with purpose. Through the back courtyard. Past the graves. Past the bell tower that had once called me to prayer. I ran until my lungs burned. Until the sound of my own breath was louder than the world behind me. And for the first time in years, I was outside, alive. Freedom didn't feel like I thought it would. It didn't come with music or peace. It came with cold, hunger, and the constant fear of being dragged back. I didn't know where to go. I didn't have money or a phone or even an identity beyond the name they tried to bury. The streets felt unfamiliar. The sky too open. I had spent so many years behind stone walls that even the wind felt violent against my face. I slept in an abandoned barn the first night, shaking, soaked from the dew. I had nothing but my habit and a thin shawl I'd stolen from the laundry room. I didn't dare speak to anyone, feared that anyone could be part of them, part of that system. What if the church had contacts? What if someone recognized me and called them? I was more afraid of the convent now than of death itself. Because at least death would be final. During the day, I hid in woods and backyards, scouring trash cans for food. I drank water from a hose behind an old gas station. Once, I saw a patrol car and ducked behind a dumpster, heart racing as the officer walked by, completely unaware of the war going on inside me. I started to hallucinate. I thought I saw Sister Miriam's eyes watching me from the trees. I thought I heard the bell of St. Aurelia ringing somewhere in the wind. I wasn't just running from them. I was running from everything I had been taught to believe, but something kept me going. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was God finally whispering when I needed him most. On the fourth night, starving and trembling, I approached the back of a church in a small Texas town. Not a convent. It's just a modest red brick chapel. The priest was locking up when he saw me. At first, he thought I was homeless. But when he looked into my eyes, he paused. I couldn't say anything, just broke down, fell to my knees. He took me in, he gave me a blanket, a sandwich, and something I hadn't felt in years: safety. That night, I slept in the back room of the church, curled on a worn couch beneath a crucifix. For the first time, I wasn't praying for forgiveness. I was praying for a new beginning. Asterisk, when my eyes opened, I didn't recognize the sky above. Me, it was vast, open, no ceiling. No bars, no candles flickering in a damp corridor. Just the pale blue of early morning stretching endlessly overhead. For a moment, I thought I was dead. Truly dead. The cold air stung my skin, and the dirt beneath my body was still damp from the night dew. Then I felt the scratch of the rough habit against my arms and the unmistakable stickiness of dried liquid on my side. I looked down, the blood-stained fabric just as I had planned. But it wasn't real. It was theater, the final performance. And I had survived it. The road beneath me was unpaved, quiet, framed by nothing but open fields and telephone poles. I had no idea where I was. I didn't care. I was out. That realization hit me like thunder in my chest. I had escaped. Not just the walls, not just the keys, not just the rituals. I had escaped them. The ones who erased voices, the ones who buried the living. But freedom didn't feel like peace. It felt like terror. I had no money, no documents. I was still dressed like a dead woman. Anyone who saw me would call the police or worse, the convent. My heart raced with every sound, every passing crow, every gust of wind that made the trees rustle like footsteps behind me. I stood slowly, legs trembling, body sore from the hours I must have spent lying there. How far had I come? How long had I been unconscious? I didn't know. I walked. I didn't know where, but I walked. My only goal was away from the place that had tried to silence me. Each step felt like a rebellion, its breath of victory. But beneath the adrenaline was something else, a deep, gnawing fear. Would they come looking for me? Because as far as the convent was concerned, I was dead. Asterisk, I had been walking for over an hour when I heard the low rumble of an engine behind me. At first, I panicked. I ducked off the road, hiding behind a cluster of dried bushes, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But then I saw it an old red semi, slowing down as it approached the bend in the road. The driver leaned out the window, squinting into the distance. He saw me. I had two choices: keep hiding and probably collapse from exhaustion, or risk everything. I stepped out of the brush slowly, arms raised, face pale and desperate. Truck rolled to a stop. The engine idled loudly as the man opened his door and stepped down. He looked rough, flannel shirt, oil-stained jeans, a beard thick with dust. He didn't look shocked to see me, just tired. Like life had shown him enough horror that nothing surprised him anymore. He scanned me from head to toe. The habit, the dried blood, the bruises on my wrists I didn't even remember getting. Then he spoke, voice low and gruff. "You runnin' from someone, sister?" I froze. He didn't ask what happened, didn't ask who I was, or why I looked like I crawled out of a grave. Just opened the passenger door and said, "You look like hell. Get in." I won't ask. That silence, that mercy, it broke something inside me. Not out of fear, but relief. I climbed in without a word. The seat was warm. The radio played a country ballad I didn't recognize. He handed me a bottle of water. I drank. He didn't even look at me. We just drove, mile after mile. No questions. No judgment. It was the first time in years I had been shown kindness with no expectation in return, and I wept silently. Watching the trees blur past the window, finally tasting what freedom might look like. In the rearview mirror of a stranger's truck, the truck driver dropped me off near a rest stop just outside a small town. He gave me a $20 bill, a bag of pretzels, and a blanket he said he didn't need. "Find a church," he told me, "but not one like the place you came from." I nodded, unable to speak. Then he drove off, disappearing into the highway's darkness. I stood there alone, clutching the blanket, unsure of where to go. The stars overhead blinked down like silent witnesses. I had no name to give, no past to claim, but I was out. That was all I had. There was a field just behind the rest stop, half shielded by trees. I curled up beneath one of them, wrapping the blanket tightly around me, still dressed in the tattered, blood-stained habit. I didn't dare go inside the building. Not yet. I was afraid someone would recognize me even though I was nobody in their world. Still, fear clung to my skin like a second layer. Every rustle in the grass made me flinch. Every headlight in the distance felt like a search party coming to drag me back. When I finally drifted off, it wasn't into peace. It was into nightmares. I saw the convent walls again, the iron gates. I saw Sister Miriam screaming as she was taken. I heard the prayers twisted into punishment. And worse, I saw Mother Agnella's face hovering above me in the dark, whispering, "God doesn't let his brides run." I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, gripping a handful of dirt. My heart was racing, my limbs frozen with terror. For a moment, I truly believed I was still there. But then, I looked up, and there was no ceiling, no candlelight, no crucifix looming above me, just sky. And in that moment, through the fear and confusion and tears, I smiled. A broken, trembling smile. 'Cause for the first time in years, I wasn't being watched. I wasn't being silenced. I wasn't being punished for existing. I was alive. Terrified, alone, scarred, but alive. Asterisk, the next morning, I stood in front of the mirror in a public restroom at the edge of town. The light buzzed overhead, flickering slightly, casting a pale glow over my face. For a long time, I just stared. The reflection looking back at me was almost unrecognizable. My cheeks were hollow, my eyes sunken, rimmed with exhaustion. My lips were cracked. My hair, once shaved beneath the veil, was now beginning to grow back in uneven patches. But beneath all that, I was still there. I was still me. That's when I knew I couldn't be Sister Anna anymore. That name belonged to the convent, to the silence, to the chains I had shed. If I wanted to survive, not just breathe, but live, needed a new name. A name not tainted by guilt or submission or stolen faith. I chose Alina. It was the name of my grandmother. A woman who had survived war, hunger, exile. A woman who never gave up her voice. I scraped together what little I had. With the truck. Drivers, $20. I bought a used hoodie from a donation bin outside a thrift store and a cheap pair of jeans from a gas station clearance rack. I changed clothes in the restroom stall, stuffing the habit into the trash. My hands trembled as I did it. Letting go of that fabric felt like shedding. Skin, painful, surreal, liberating. I stared at it one last time before closing the lid. That blood-stained habit, once a symbol of devotion. Now just a costume from a life I refused to return to, with my new clothes. I blended into the world for the first time in years. No one looked twice at me. No one called me sister. I was just another tired girl walking alone down a small-town street. And that anonymity felt like a miracle. I found a library and used a public computer to look up shelters, places that helped women like me. I couldn't give my real name. I didn't have ID, but I had a voice again, and I used it, carefully, cautiously, one sentence at a time. For the first time, began to build something of my own. A future not built on fear, but choice. A name not given, but claimed. And a life that no longer belonged to silence. Years passed, quietly, carefully. I learned how to exist again, how to walk down the street without fear. How to sleep without nightmares. How to speak without whispering. I found work cleaning homes. I volunteered at shelters. I started therapy. Through a free clinic that never once asked for my past. I never wore a habit again. I never stepped into another convent. And for a long time I told myself that silence was safety. That forgetting was survival. But the memories never left me. They clung to the edges of my mind, soft, sharp, and unrelenting. The screams I couldn't stop. The prayers that turned into chains. The sisters who disappeared, the room beneath the chapel. The files marked deceased. The weight of pretending I was one of them when all I wanted was to be free. I buried it all deep, until it felt like another life. Another woman, another world, and then one day I saw a headline. It's a story about a convent investigation in another state. About nuns who were abused, silenced, erased. I saw the photo of one woman who finally spoke. Her eyes looked like mine once, did haunted, tired, but brave. Something cracked inside me, because I realized if I stay silent, I'm helping them. I'm letting the ones who did this keep doing it. I'm leaving the next girl to suffer alone in the dark. So today I'm telling you everything, not for pity, not for shock, but for truth. Because someone out there is still inside those walls. Someone out there is praying for a way out. Maybe, just maybe, my story will be the light that guides her to the door. I'm not Sister Anna anymore. But I remember her, and now, so will you.